Hi, everybody. It is exactly 70 minutes to happy hour. Okay. Woo. How is everybody doing? So welcome again. This is the beginning of the afternoon sessions. As we spoke about this morning, we've designed this day into 3 parts: metrics, meaning, and matrices. And this is the matrices section. We are really interested in creating new constructs and really fostering new mindsets. So this part of the day is all about change agents. You are going to get to meet some people that are doing just that day to day with amazing success and great integrity. These are folks that are doing things that are very meaningful to them. And we're also going to be hearing from someone outside the field, also in creative fields, but outside architecture. So we want to look beyond our day-to-day to learn and experience creativity and just boldness from someone else. And we're going to end with some closing comments. So again, now 69 minutes to happy hour. Before we go into the logistics of the conversation, we just wanted to take a moment. If you've seen the matrices in your breakout sessions, and if you've seen them starting to emerge in the gallery, thank Lucinda Tai. Lucinda, are you here? She's right in the middle. She is the author and creator of this great project. And also with her have been many, many, many volunteers that have been bumblebees. So raise your hand if you have touched an Eames matrices board today. See how many? So thank you so much. We talked about just talking, being, and making, and I think the matrices project is an idea we had, and I'm completely tickled by what's become of it. So what's going to happen? We're going to just introduce. Kat Gorton is going to give us a keynote presentation. We're going to segue into another panel, the last panel, and some closing statements from the AA National President. And Rosa Shang will send us off with a beautiful message at the end of the day. So here we are. I'm just going to say a few things about Kat. I just met her. I've been inspired by Kat for the last month or so. A few things to know about Kat. She's an advertising creative director. She's been called a triple threat. She's friendly. She'll hug you back. She's an entrepreneur, an ad woman, and a marketing expert in marketing to women. She was named one of the 30 most creative women in advertising by Business Insider in 2016. That's amazing. She also found it very similar to some of the things that we're trying to do here, the 3% conference. And in that case, she was really trying to think about what's happening in advertising. And in some ways, a creative field just like ours having very similar issues in terms of who's at the table, how are people being recognized, and how is the next generation really being born and nourished in the same way. She joins us today as a keynote speaker. She put this really great video together, so I'm just going to stop and let the video do its own thing. So video, please.
because we need innovation and disruption. Women challenge the status quo because we are never it.
The 3% conference has made me stop apologizing for being very female-friendly. It always makes me feel like my instincts were right.
Recognizing diversity and inclusion is a competitive advantage.
The essence of a modern leader is more feminine in the eyes of 64,000 people in 13 countries around the world. 64,000 people can't be wrong.
And that's what I've come away from this conference with. Change is on the horizon.
This is the thought I want to leave you with. We are past the point of no return.
Please welcome Kat Gordon.
Hello. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Lillian. That's the first time that video has ever been shown. Our 5th annual conference is this week in New York City on Thursday and Friday. So I was testing it out on you guys. What did you think? Thank you. Okay. I want to start by dedicating this talk to my grandfather, who was an architect. This is a photo of him here. His name was Eugene Kennedy. I knew him as Grampy, and he was actually quite a celebrated architect. He designed the National Shrine in Washington, D.C., and a number of other cathedrals. And my mother told me when he died at the end of my college years that it's good he didn't live to see me work in advertising, because he had tremendous disdain for the advertising field. So I feel like this is my penance, talking to all of you today. So how many of you watched the television show Mad Men? Okay. So a lot of people assume that that's kind of a quaint time capsule. But I am here to tell you that it is actually shockingly accurate for how things are even today in 2016. When I started this movement, only 3% of creative directors were women, and that's the job I've been doing for 25 years, and thus the name of our movement, 3%. Primarily white, male, young creatives. And what really made me nuts when I would look at that stat was that if you look at who does all the buying that the advertising is supposed to motivate, it's primarily women. And it's a very multi-ethnic group, and the buying power peaks in older consumers. So if you have a super young, male, white group of creatives, it's very limited to the connections they can make to motivate the intended audience. So I talk about this Emperor's New Clothes moment, and it happened here in San Francisco. I was working at Hal Riney and Partners on Battery Street, and we were pitching a new account, the Saab car account. And so this is obviously going back a while. Saab isn't around anymore. But they put together the team that would do the pitch to this new client. And it was 16 men and 1 woman. And I was not actually the 1 woman. But my creative director boss was a good photographer, so he took the headshots of the entire team for the leave behind for the client, and he taped them up in the creative department. And then he put a big banner under it that said, "Would you buy a car from these guys?" to get us all excited in the momentum up to this pitch. And so I walked past that wall every single day for weeks on my way to the ladies' room or the parking garage, and I just couldn't believe that the pattern I was seeing of male, 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 by the way, all white males, my creative director didn't see, because creative directors are trained to make connections between things that other people might miss. And it just was ludicrous to me that this was what we were going to show Saab, was the group of talent that would service their account if we were to win it. So that really, really bugged me. So I started the 3% movement. The conference is one element of the movement, and I'll talk more, but we became an LLC under the name the 3% Movement to signify that we are more than just live events. Now, a lot of times when I get written about, people talk about that Emperor's New Clothes moment, and then they talk about the 3% movement, just like I did to you moments ago. I want to tell you that there were 16 years between those two things. So in 1996 is when I was standing in Halloranny looking at that great wall of men, and it wasn't until 2012 that I started the conference. And so really what I want to encourage all of you here today is that we don't have that kind of time. And if you have an idea or if something's underway and you want to accelerate it, do it, because I so regret that I wasted those years now that I've seen the contribution I've been able to make. So the first rule of change agency is don't wait to be ready. And I say it's kind of like parenthood. How many of you, I'm a mom, how many in the room have kids? A lot of you. It's the kind of thing where people say, how will I know when I'm ready? You're never ready to be a parent. I mean, the toll it takes on your life and the just chaos of parenthood is very similar to any kind of entrepreneurial venture. You will never, ever feel that you are ready. So start immediately. So now that I've shared my shame of waiting 16 years, I want to share my pride of what happened once I did finally take action. So as you saw in the video, we have a 26,000 person community, and we are only 4 years old. So that really shows how when you take to social media and have a cause people care about, you can really quickly mobilize a large group of people. And female creative directors are up to 11% from 3% in 4 years. So, yeah. It's funny, people in advertising creatives are not traditionally very good at math. And when this number came out, a lot of people were like, congrats on the 8% gain. And I'm like, that's a 300% gain. So it is a big deal. So I am extremely proud that we have men engaged and involved in our movement. And I sat in on a little bit of the last panel, and I don't know your name, but yes. Amy made a great point about how there's a little bit of ego management when you bring the issue of diversity to management if it is largely white men. And I 100% agree with you that the tactic I always took was not, this is an activist movement, or this isn't fair, or we need quotas. It was, we are leaving money on the table for our clients. And that definitely gets people's attention. I am probably one of the only creative directors who started in market research. That's an incredibly unusual trajectory. So I actually do like numbers, do understand numbers, do embrace data, and I have the gift of making things persuasive with words. And I think that has been an incredibly powerful union. You also saw in the video our 100 Things document, and I almost feel like what you guys have been doing with the boards where you're putting up the Post-it notes is exactly that. It's gathering and crowdsourcing microactions, small things that companies can do to create more diverse environments. And basically all of the things that are on our list are things that I have heard or witnessed on our traveling events, in blogging, in reading, and researching. And it's a document that's actually on our website and that has been given out at other conferences. I really encourage any of you to download it and see what you could be importing into your company. And I would love to see the outcome of your brain sourcing today and see if there are things we can import into our 100 Things document from the architectural world. So 5 annual conferences. The 5th one is actually this week, as I said, in New York City. Amazing growth. Our first event was here in San Francisco. It was a one-day event. We had 200 people, which was all the venue could hold. It sold out in advance. And we now are expecting 1,000 people in New York. So there's a lot of appetite for this issue. And then we've done traveling events. And this is something interesting. I just read Gloria Steinem's memoir, which is an amazing book, and she talks about how when she became interested in civil rights, she went on what she called listening tours, where she would just go all over the country, gather women together, talk and listen. And as I was reading this book, I was like, that's exactly what I did after I launched the first conference, and I don't remember how I knew to do that. No one taught me how to be an activist, but I somehow understood that there was community that needed to be birthed, and that there was learning as well as teaching I need to do, and I couldn't do that just sitting here in Palo Alto. And so we have been to every major US city. We were in Toronto at the end of August. We did a one-day conference there. We did a one-day conference in London last summer. So definitely encourage you to get out of Dodge, wherever Dodge is for you, and to listen to what people are doing in other regions. And there are dramatic differences I've seen in different cities here in the US. It's amazing how certain cities are far more progressive on these issues than others. And certain countries, like I would say London is 10 years behind the US in terms of diversity awareness and activation. And then the last thing I'm super proud about is that for years I've been saying to our brand counterparts, our clients, you have the right to demand diversity on your account because you're paying the bills. They're the ones that choose their agency partners and create the agency of record relationships. Last year's fall conference, we themed brands on board, and I overtly made a play to have more CMOs and product managers and vice presidents of marketing on stage in the audience. And I said from the stage exactly what I just said to you. Brands, you have the right to speak up. You have the right to ask for diversity. Well, this year, it was an amazing turn of events. I don't know how many of you saw this in the news, but 3 major brands, General Mills, Hewlett-Packard, and Verizon, all had their CMOs make a public edict to their ad agencies saying, I want 50% women on my account, I want 20% people of color on my account, and I'm gonna audit you around this. And that's exactly how change needs to happen, is hit them where it hurts. So that, I'm super proud that just saying that over and over again, sometimes you can feel like you're repeating yourself and you're wondering if anyone's hearing you, and then something like that happens and it's just like we're off to the races. So how did we do this? How did we go from 3% to 11% in just 4 years? Rooted in data, I just alluded to that, but people have a really hard time arguing with research. And so if you can find research that shows that there are better outcomes for your industry or more money to be made by becoming more diverse, start there, because no one's going to argue with that. And again, build it city by city. It's super important to build a community and to reach out to other people, even reach out to other industries. Like, I'm really excited about what I could learn from what you guys have generated here today and vice versa. And measure what matters. It's super important to have metrics around things you're trying to change. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how important that was in advertising on the panel. And be optimistic. This is something that I think, the phrase I used when a reporter asked me about 3% recently, I said, we are more watchdog than bulldog. And there are a lot of things that have happened in the past year, extremely bad, highly visible misbehavior by a chairman within the advertising industry and a CEO. I don't know how many of you followed the J. Walter Thompson lawsuit and then Kevin Roberts of Saatchi, both men fired. I do not get excited when men lose their jobs. What excites me is getting to a point where that would never happen. So I think it's super important when you're trying to get other people to work with you to make it clear that everyone has a role to play. And not be a voice of doom and gloom. Even that video, you can see it's very, very, forward-thinking. It's very inclusive. It's very optimistic, and that's a tone that I've just always taken because I feel like people want to be part of things that are winning or things that are changing in a positive way instead of just doom and gloom. And we're all, it just sucks, and nothing's ever going to get better. Who wants to be a part of that? And then. I think it's really important to provide clear directives, and this is something that I think as a creative director, you're trained when you're writing an ad or writing a TV commercial. What do you want the consumer to do? Like, do you want them to pick up the phone and order something? Do you want them to go to your social media channels? It's always the call to action is super important. And it's the same with any kind of diversity initiative is what do you want people to do? Once they're fired up and they're nodding along with you, tell them what their next action is and make it something very doable. I think our 100 things list is that kind of at scale. Here are 100 things. Often at conferences, people will say, what is the one thing you want people to do or to take away? And I'm like, I want them to download the 100 things I want them to do. Because they really are small and doable. And the more you do these little things and realize how easy they are and how successful they are, it begets more of the same behavior. Another thing that we did is we partnered, and this is so important, is that if you silo yourself in any way, you are limiting the impact you can have. And so I'm always on the lookout for who else is doing work that is somehow related to what we're doing. And a great example is, how many of you have seen the documentary Misrepresentation? Okay, so that film just celebrated its 5th anniversary, and you'll see that we are just about to have our 5th event. So I went to a screening of that film right after it launched here in San Francisco at the PG&E headquarters. There were about 300 people there, watched the film. Afterwards, Jennifer Siebel Newsom was being interviewed on stage about the film, and then they opened it up to questions, and no one was asking questions, and so I raised my hand, and they brought the microphone over, and I stood up, and I thanked her for the film, and then I said the following words. I said, one of the things that your film suggests, but does not state overtly, is something that I would like to state overtly here today, and that is that one of the reasons that advertising is so punishing to women is that women rarely have a hand in its creation. And so that was my meeting with Jennifer Siebel Newsom, is me making a quote, from the audience. She ended up seeking me out and calling me the next day and saying, I'd like to be involved in your event. She spoke at our first event. She spoke last year at our event, and we now work with them on Super Bowl Sunday, which is advertising's biggest spend day of the year. We have Super Bowl tweet-ups all over the country where women are tweeting in real time about the ads that are playing. And what's important about that is that it says, first of all, women are almost 50% of the viewing audience of the Super Bowl. So as recently as a few years ago, the ads were so offensive. And quite frankly, they were offensive to men. I mean, the stereotypes that were being enacted were just terrible, at the tune of $4 million for 30 seconds to offend at this level. And so I had this idea, let's talk back in real time. So we create a little scorecard where we have every single brand that's going to be advertising. We have their Twitter handle and the Twitter handle of their ad agency that made the spot that you're viewing. And we use this, yeah. It's a different world. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is from Gary Vaynerchuk, and he says, the deer now have rifles. So you have power as consumers, and so speaking back, and quite frankly, we also speak back to media we like. At the time, Misrepresentation had a similar campaign with the hashtag not buying it. And I encouraged them to start a secondary one, which was media we like. Because again, you want to catch brands being good as well as being bad. Anyway, that's an example of a partnership that came about because they were doing something. And I remember telling Jennifer before she got on stage in year one of our conference, I said, Jennifer, everyone is here in this room is a female media maker or someone who wants to support more female media makers in the field of advertising. And I said, most of the talks today are about the business imperative for diversity. I said, your talk is about the cultural imperative for diversity and how we see ourselves in advertising and how it can be so demoralizing for young boys and girls to not see that they have a place in the world. So really encourage you to find other like-minded organizations that you partner with. And then lastly, involve youth. And I heard something recently that you can judge the strength of any social movement by how many young people are involved. And I am no longer a young person. I have made peace with that. I have a son who just started at college this summer. And we have a number of initiatives to bring young people into our events. In fact, that traveling city model, I think in a way became our youth magnet because our conference in New York is expensive. And it's probably out of touch for their budget. And so our traveling events are extremely affordable. Students always come for half price. We have a student scholarship where 12 students come to the New York City event free of charge. We do a portfolio review with them. So find ways to get young energy and blood into your movement. Okay, so here it is, our nuclear weapon, the 100 things list. I really encourage you to start your own. We're starting to do variations on this. Like at Mother's Day, we had a 20 things list of things you can do to retain women through motherhood in agency environments. We actually had a guest post where 3 faculty members were realizing that we have to educate the educators, the people that are teaching advertising students about diversity. So we got 3 of the best, one from Stanford and DePauw, 3 universities came together and they made a list of what faculty needs to do to support diversity in their programs. So aggregate all the wisdom and make it really digestible and shareable. And celebrate success. So one of the things we do at our conference at the end of day 1, it's a 2-day conference, right before the cocktail party, we give out an award called the 3 Cheers Award. And we don't honor companies, we honor individuals. And so we look for 1 man and 1 woman who in the last calendar year have done something notable to advance diversity in marketing. And we take the nominations right off our Facebook page, we crowdsource them from our community, and it's so awesome to have these people come to the event and get recognized. All they get is a magnum of Veuve Clicquot champagne, but it's a more symbolic gesture, and we're just going into the cocktail party, so everyone's in a great mood. So find the people that deserve to be standing in the spotlight and celebrate them. And involve everyone. This is a graphic of an ambassador bingo card we have where each square is a micro action for men that they can do. And that's also on our website, you can download it. But we play this on the stage. We have a group of ambassadors, men that are doing awesome things in their companies, and they have the bingo card. Everyone in the audience has it. It's in our program. And we ask each man to say one thing he feels he's doing with excellence and one thing he's pledging to do better at. And it's remarkable. In all the cities we've done it, you don't have the same 2 things, chosen over and over. Different men have different gifts that they can give to this movement. And some of them are more in a mentorship capacity, some of them are more outspoken and they write op-ed pieces, and so they have a chance to talk about what they're doing, and that inspires other people in the audience. And be visual. So when we started our movement, I'll read it. I'll read it for anyone in the back row. So it's basically a creative presentation. This is what it looks like in agencies where you can tell the ad people, because they have the goatees and the cool clothes, and then the clients look like stuffed shirts. But they're basically showing a board with an ad on it of a woman mopping, and one of the clients says, if I were a 34-year-old time-pressed mother of 3, I'd want to see a little more cleavage in this ad. So the reason we commissioned this cartoon from a fabulous guy named Tom Fishburne, who does solely cartooning about marketing, he's called the Marketoonist. I felt like in our first year, it was a new idea. Oh, 3%, what does that relate to? Why does it matter? What are you guys doing? There was a lot of wind-up. And I was like, God, I just want one piece of content that can tell the whole story super quickly. And so I hired Tom, and he gave me 3 executions, and I liked this one the best, and we've used the hell out of this. So it's great to have some really quick way to telegraph what you're doing, because you don't always have the liberty of addressing a group like this for 35 minutes. And then be social. You saw that I announced the conference with a single tweet. I was speaking at the 140 conference here in San Francisco 6 years ago, so it shows you it took a while for me to get this thing off the ground, but I just started a Twitter handle that morning and tweeted and announced at the end of my presentation it was relevant to what I was presenting about, threw up a landing page for people to go to and sign up for email updates, so that when we finally launched, I had hundreds of people to email it's a go, buy a ticket, come interview us. And then it was great because just maybe within the first year of our conference, we got the following tweet beneath it, which I don't know if you can see, but it's Roger Sterling from Mad Men. All of their characters have their own Twitter handles, and he tweeted to us. In fact, the date on this is April 18th, 2012. This is before our first conference even happened. So Mad Men caught wind of it, and he tweeted to us at 3% conference, "You can't be serious. Women creative directors, that'll be the day." So be social. You don't know who's listening. And then lastly, be insatiably curious. This is a chart that have any of you read Adam Grant's new book called Originals? Okay, it's awesome. He's coming to keynote at our conference. I'm so excited. He is a Wharton professor, and it's a book, the subtitle is How Nonconformists Move the World. And one of the things in his book that caught my eye was he looked at Nobel-winning scientists, and the likelihood that a scientist would win the Nobel Prize was exponentially greater if they had a hobby in the arts. Whether it was writing, crafts, music, like to a factor of 10, I think it goes up. I mean, dramatically different. And just this week, I actually attended the TED Women Conference here in San Francisco. And there were these two young scientists, female scientists, I think they were from Croatia. They were like 19 years old. These women were unreal. And they got up on stage and they were showing this water purification invention they had made. And they talked about how when they were developing it, that there was something that, a stumbling block. And one of the girls got out her flute. She was a musician. She had brought it on stage, and she showed how she had an idea about containing steam and using a tube, and it was like basically based on the wind flow of a flute because she was a flautist. And so this is exactly that in action, is that the more connections that your brain can make to things outside of your exact profession, the more likelihood you are to connect dots. So, this is actually advice I would give to anyone on any topic, is that the minute you lose your curiosity or think that you're one thing versus another, you've lost. And a story I love to tell is a number of years ago, I was on an airplane and I was reading a book by the IDEO founders called The 10 Faces of Innovation, another excellent business book. And it seems kind of silly now to admit this, but it was a revelation to me reading this book. I remember closing it and having this kind of aha moment that, oh, I get it. I'm a creative person, and I happened to pick up a pen and become a copywriter, but I could have applied that and still can apply that to other things. And shortly after that aha moment, I was in my home with my architect and my husband and the builder. We were remodeling our kitchen, and there was a spatial problem, and we couldn't figure it out. And we were all sitting there, and all of a sudden I said, what if this closet was two-sided, and the desk we wanted was there, and we could close it away, and then it frees up this wall for a window because it's kind of dark here? And my builder looked at me and said, you just saved yourself $10,000. And I never thought of myself as someone that, I can barely park. I mean, I don't think I'm particularly spatially minded, but I think that permission that the thing you're good at is just one thing you're good at, and probably is a good indicator that you can apply those skills elsewhere, it changed my whole way of looking. In fact, I don't think I would have started the conference if I hadn't read that book and had that aha, because we get so limiting in, I am this, and my degree from school is in this, and the awards have won have been tied to that. And we are so much more than that. And so I just really encourage you to never lose your curiosity about all things in the world. And that is really it. That is how I built. In fact, I often say I want to tell you about myself not because I think I'm remarkable, but because I think I'm actually quite ordinary. But ordinary people that are paying attention and know how to mobilize others get shit done. And yeah. Thank you. So we're now going to have a panel discussion, and look forward to that.
3 cheers to Kat. Thank you for the inspiration, Kat. We are delighted to continue the conversation. We have other inspiring thought leaders, and this session also is available for credit, so just a couple of minutes if you will bear with us. The Matrices panel brings together leaders who have one thing in common, a desire to create better environments for equity. This panel, which is diverse in race, gender, cultural, and professional background, shares how their insatiable passions to make things count were shaped. One particular similarity in the journeys of these change agents is that they remember the moments when they realized they were the first, where there was no role model, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. We will discuss the hallmarks of meaning in their transformational and inspiring leadership and the matrices that they have weaved to trailblaze and achieve their people-centered missions. A couple of learning objectives. Where's your Oprah card? This is going to be bringing you home to the moment where you can actually feel empowered and inspired to name what you're going to commit to and what you're going to be a champion for. So the first learning objective is to identify what is a change agent and the shared attributes that motivate their leadership, to understand the importance of meaningful experiences and how they set the stage for change to be embraced, to create a framework for launching your own personal journey as a change agent, and to develop clarity around your EQXD commit goals. So you should have heard us at 2:30, sitting on the table, basking in sun. We were just giddy because it's been really interesting getting together, but it's interesting because I think people that are like-minded somehow find each other, and it doesn't take that long to connect. So we were just hanging out. So I want to share a little bit about some of the things that struck me from our panelists. Brian, welcome, Brian. With a background in architecture, Brian lives in the intersection between public art and social impact design in civic spaces, and he leads 2 award-winning architecture and design programs for high school students. His hobbies are dancing and public speaking. If you sort of Google TED, Brian's done several. Pacha, he's an expert. We should have probably had you train us. We didn't even think about that. And he's also the recent recipient of the Team XQ Challenge. With that, he's actually developing to work on a new prototype for schools, one that is actually built as a series of notes along the Mississippi River. If you're interested, hashtag school on a barge. And Gabrielle, right here to the right, she's trained with a double major in fine arts and architecture at the Rhode Island School of Design, and recognized as a fellow of the AIA in 2014. Congratulations, that's a big deal. You're alive. I know, congratulations. Gabrielle has been a trailblazer in design done through the lens of social justice. As a former managing director and current global diversity director at Perkins & Will, she is transforming the work culture to foster an environment rich in diverse talent and fresh ideas. Sandra, I love Sandra. She was my teacher in school. She is a Latino cultural expert and a published author with profound knowledge in modern art and architecture in Latin America. As a founding principal of A+Z Architecture and Design, she has developed a practice characterized by innovative community-based processes. As I said, many moons ago, she was my professor at Cal, and she's currently teaching as a professor of architecture and diversity studies at CCA. Okay, so I'm going to join the panel lists. And I think we're going to switch over from this to that. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Is this on? Okay, thank you. Yes, 1 for 2, 1 for 2. And we can share. So, as I said, we had a couple of go-tos and some conversations, and I had just the pleasure of sort of getting to know everybody in singular and in group mode. And something that really struck me as I was thinking about the matrices and why this panel could come together is that you have sort of the 3Ps, right? You've all come together at a particular place and time, something that's really personal to you, and something that really ties to your professional area of practice. So I wanted to sort of launch this open question. I know we just heard about your amazing work, so I wanted to sort of have Gabrielle, Sandra, and Brian share a little bit about can you think back, what was the aha moment that said, wow, there's something there that I want to be part of, and what was that?
This is going to be super spontaneous.
I love it.
No, we're hyper prepared for this, so just to be very clear. So, aha moments. I'm going to give you 2 about transition. The first being, so when I was 7 years old, I lived in Comiso, Sicily. My mother was a military commander, and we lived there during the first Gulf War. I don't know if you've ever been to Sicily or Italy, beautiful, obviously. And I then moved back to Trenton, New Jersey. So I'm not sure if you've been to Trenton, New Jersey. Not as, I mean, I love it, it's my home, but like, you know, it ain't the same thing. So I lived there with my grandmother for the first couple months, and after a month or two of walking up and down this dark kind of corridor in the center of the house, I was like, this is bull. Cameras, I can say that, right? We're good? All right. This is a problem. What does that mean, Mom, Dad? And they said, it's architecture. And I kind of transitioned into, okay, what is the meaning of having a space that is designed for somebody who's having to live in a disinherited community, a place that has been historically disadvantaged from the values that we place on architecture and place over time. So that's the first one. The second one was I went to Florida A&M. You know, it's wonderful, just a quick side note, to have mentors and friends who have been there all along. I have one of my first friends at FAMU, Karen, is here, who one of the first days was like, oh, you're good at this, aren't you? And like, just like that initial support to be in there is fantastic. So anyway, coming from FAMU, a historically black college and university, to understand that as a home was very important. And so about 2 years in, I got sick, and I had to move and transition to The Ohio State University. Go Buckeyes all day, every day. But that transition, I actually got a chance to understand what exactly the profession looked like. You know, you have 900 people in Knowlton School of Architecture, giant school, but there were 3 African Americans in my class alone. And I thought all black people were architects. When I went to FAMU, there was a lot of us. So it was like, this ain't a problem. So, so going to Ohio State was really shocking, and it kind of threw me off a little bit. And so it was the introduction to an organization that is dear to my heart, which is the National Organization of Minority Architects. And that kind of gave me a launch pad into working around social justice in the built environment. So that's my ahas.
Great. What about you, Sandra?
So my aha moment, I think, first came in graduate school. I had the very famous Dutch Stararchitect professor, and he proposed that we would choose a piece of literature as a kind of conceptual point of departure. And at the time, I was really fascinated with this magical realism novel, which he very quickly invalidated and rejected. And so, because basically he was unfamiliar with the genre, so his shortcoming became my problem. And so I found that, you know, when I researched what was really happening, or what I analyzed, it had to do with not only the power play between professor and student, but also male-female. But at a certain level, the more that I study, say, the history of modern architecture in Latin America, it was also a Europe-Latin America type of dichotomy, and a kind of implied a hierarchy that I quickly tried to dismantle. So I think that when I came back to the Bay Area, and shortly after I met Lillian at Cal, I decided that what really needed to be taught in architecture schools was to encourage the student to find their own voice, to find the ways, the things that they dream about at night, and to actually help them into that transition, and to trying to change it or to transform it into conceptual ideas that can feed their work. And so that's what I have done in my work as a professor, in the kind of project briefs that I propose, and the kind of community interactions that I orchestrate with them. And I always teach them to learn and from the community and really listen, because I think that that's probably one of the best things that we can do as an architect.
Thank you. Gabrielle?
So my aha moment has been cumulative for the last 30 years. There wasn't one moment. And I did not go to HBCU, so I didn't think any black people were architects at RISD. So I was the second black woman to graduate from RISD's architecture program in the mid-'80s. Wow. So I'm used to being one of the only ones in the room, the first this, the first that. So it's my life. I've been with Perkins & Will for a very long time, and it really hit me about 6 years ago that the lack of diversity and cultural competency that we have as a profession, and Perkins & Will in particular at the time, when we were working on projects in Saudi Arabia, hospitals, universities, the culture was vastly different than the US. And our team wasn't paying attention to that. And so I saw the danger in not being culturally competent and not understanding for the communities which we serve and design for. So in 2013, I had an opportunity to change my role in the firm. I had a firm-wide role, I had a local role, and I took a chance, and I said, it's time for me and the firm to take a stand on diversity, both specifically from a racial diversity perspective. I think we got the gender thing covered. I think this group and the organizations that are talking about it, I think there's a plan going forward. I don't think that there is a plan going forward for racial diversity. So that is one of the biggest challenges I think we have around equity and diversity. So anyway, I proposed an unprecedented role in the firm as Director of Global Diversity, and I was committed to owning it and making it work. So that was a risk in and of itself, because then I run the risk, and Sandra, I think you and I talked about this, you run the risk of being called the diversity lady. So I am the diversity lady sometimes, but I'm also an architect, and 50% of my time is on architecture. So if anybody wants to do this, this role, I suggest that you maintain your position in the field to maintain credibility and connection. So I think that summarizes why I consider myself a change agent and what caused it.
Thank you. It's so amazing to hear the root of what you're doing today. These moments clearly touched your heart and inspired you in ways that have funneled you when the going gets tough. And so it's commendable that all of you are sort of having such deep influence in the roots that you're creating. So I wanted to sort of launch into thinking about the structure for today, and we talked about data in terms of metrics and meaning, and then the matrices. And I wanted to pose a question to both Kat and Sandra, because in our conversations, you sort of both talked about research. And I wanted to ask you, what are the things that you've been researching, or what are the things that you're paying attention to in terms of metrics? And what have you witnessed from when you started, where you are, and where you wish you could be? So how does data support the work that you're doing in your activism?
So our entire conference's name is based on data, 3%. And as I shared with you, the number is up to 11%. So,
Which is 300%.
yes, it's a 300% increase for those of you
suck at
not
math,
inclined
I
at
was
math. So that's obviously the most important metric I keep my eye on, is how many women are in creative leadership. And there's absolutely no reason why that number is not 50%. We have a very different issue in advertising than STEM. We do not have a recruitment problem. We don't have to get young girls interested in being creative directors. The portfolio schools graduate more young women than men, and have been for a long time, which I think makes this even more criminal, is that we have the talent and we hemorrhage them right at the point that they're most valuable. And so that's the number I am really, really fixated on. One of the things that has been fascinating is we've started to do our own research, and that costs money. We take some of the money that our sponsors give to underwrite our event, and we earmark it towards research. And what that has done is fascinating, is that when something happens that's newsworthy, we are in the Wall Street Journal, because the 3% movement has done research on this. And I referenced earlier the chairman of Saatchi & Saatchi making very egregious remarks to the press, and I got called that very day, what do you have to say about Kevin Roberts? And I was in a unique position to be able to say with complete statistical accuracy that he was wrong, because we had just wrapped up, we did a survey called Elephant on Madison Avenue, and we had just completed it, 600 women in advertising telling us about how prevalent gender bias and sexism was in their agency environments, and it's horrifying. But necessary. It's like you need to know how bad things are before you can improve them. So very, very interested in research. We also did a survey called What Women Want, where we interviewed women who were in creative directors or on the path to creative directors and said, what will keep you loyal? And the fascinating thing was we found that if an agency had 25% or more women in leadership, all of the other things that women told us they cared about self-corrected. Lack of sexual harassment, more equitable sharing of the plum assignments, wage equity. And I remember looking at the research with the researcher and saying, oh, I get it. The key to having more women is having more women. Like, it makes sense. So those are some of the things. The thing that we are announcing that we are going to put some serious money behind for 2017 is the issue of racial diversity in our field, which is awful. And so we have created a group within our community of people that want to spearhead those efforts. I'm very aware as a white woman that I was asked recently, like, what is it like for people of color in advertising? And I said I would never speak for a community to which I don't belong. I will tell you what my black friends tell me it's like to work in advertising, but I would never speak, for a group, a demographic I don't belong to. And so we want to highlight and give a megaphone to those issues and figure out what unique kind of support needs to be built around that. So that's kind of what's on my radar.
That's great. That's amazing. And Sandra, you had you have a mic right here. Half and half.
So when I started my firm in San Francisco in the early 90s, in my daily commute to work, I would notice the day laborers that were standing on the street, and really it irked me that their basic necessities were not being met, stuff like shelter and a bathroom and communication. So I actually researched that, which eventually led to one of my first commissions and working with with an organization and the mission that was working for their rights and for themselves as well. But this research also made me, and the ensuing competing for public projects, community centers, education, and some affordable housing, made me realize that the number of Latina-owned firms in San Francisco, and I'm sure that this is the case nationally, is probably under 1%. As of 2011, according to AIA statistics, only 3% of the membership is Latino.
There's that number again.
The 3%. and that's an incredible difference between the 18% that we represent in the US population or the 39% in California. So there is definitely work to be done in that respect. And even, I was reading an article in The Atlantic this month where they were pointing out that Latino-owned businesses are growing at 50 times faster than any of the other businesses, and that in 2012, they made up 12% of the business owners in the US. So it seems to me that our professional organizations, and by that I mean not only the AIA, but NCARB and NAB, even in the educational field, really need to look into ways to start to also include that population, because we're definitely not doing a great job of serving them.
Thank you. So clearly change agents, clearly observers, clearly folks that are bold enough to say that this is a time there's unlike any other. I wanted to also kind of reflect on something that struck me from these four folks, is that as we were thinking about today and the survey and how we organized the two halves, which is the dynamics and the pinch points, there's a lot of attention to the journey of a professional. And it struck me that two of you are actually touching academia as high school and the new prototypes for schools, and you're actively involved from teaching me and still continuing to do that, and Kat and Gabrielle, you're both in practice. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about those two spheres of influence. How are you affecting the change? How are you becoming the role models that you were missing? And what are the sort of ingredients of that commitment in your day-to-day life?
So the first thing was really about finding a way to be present in communities that are underserved, right? I generally call it, so we have disinherited communities that have been disinherited from all of the processes and been subject to systemic oppression, systemic racism over time. But we have to, acknowledge that all of those things contribute to where we stand today. And so a lot of the programs that I've worked on about so I'll just start with Project Pipeline. 5 years ago in New Orleans, we decided that we wanted to frame the issues that we had in our city by saying that there's an obvious connection to the built environment, right? So architecture is the hardware to the software of life. It's inextricably linked no matter what. So any issue that you deal with in this world has a physical, a built world manifestation. And so for our students, whatever their interests are, see, like the first thing they always say is, I'm not really interested in architecture. Okay, cool, you wanna be a doctor? Well, you gotta do a hospital. Or what does it mean to have 20% of patients come out of a hospital quicker because you've designed a space in a certain way, right? And so they then have no avenue to kind of move away from it. They understand that design has an implication on everything that they do. And so what I have found is that in working with students in the camp format and structuring it around social justice issues, our students are gaining more out of the process of community engagement. They're gaining more out of the process of neighborhood development, and then they can build buildings that are directly related to that. And then the second thing, to move beyond just the architectural component, we're looking at stratifying the profession, right? There's one way in and one way out. Somebody mentioned this earlier today. You know, when you are an architect, it is only solely defined in this area. And so those of us who have shifted to the left or shifted to the right are not considered architects. We're not considered part of the profession, which is bull. I'm not, y'all can't kick me out, so deal with it. And I'm coming, yeah, you know what I mean? And so what does it mean for us to take that on in a bunch of different ways at a bunch of different stratas? And so creating a design advocacy program, which we're working on with the AIA, that allows for people who are artists and activists at every level to be a connector within the community is huge, because those people can actually serve a huge part in the programmatic, the engagement components of our work. And then what that translates to is the ability to create programs like we run at the Arts Council of New Orleans, which is a program called Youth Solutions, which we do a youth design build program. So every summer, we gather in between 5 to 15 students. They work with the community organization that has an issue that they want to resolve, right? Whether that's literacy or healthcare or food. This summer we had one that was dealing with literacy in low-income communities. And so we had our students interview that organization. They decided on designing a mobile snowball stand. So I don't know if you've been to New Orleans, it's shaved ice, essentially. A mobile snowball stand called It's Lit. So if you're in popular culture, you understand what that means, right? It's lit, right? So the idea is that the currency, no? We'll get back to it, we'll come back to you. I'll tweet it. I'll tweet it to you later on. But essentially, what the students were able to do was to design a space they built in 5 weeks. We found a lot. We built this mobile trailer that was constructed by 16 to 19-year-olds with the effort of 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds who were going to be working on this. And the currency was literature. So if you went and wrote a poem, if you wrote something of some sort and came and gave it to the people in this particular mobile piece, you got a snowball, right? So architecture, this physical envelopment, actually had a direct connection to an academic, a social, a communal kind of situation. And so those are the situations that we as architects have to continue to put into the world.
Well done.
Yeah.
So what I really missed in school and later on in the profession were appropriate role models. So one of the things that I've done, and I'm trying to do that, to become that role model for my students, very much like the woman that sat on that chair and said, you know, encouraging her younger employee, I think that's you, very moving, you know, that it's okay to try to balance family and the workplace. So on the one hand, becoming a mentor to my students and to younger architects, But on the other hand, I had to create a context, a kind of theoretical context for the kind of work that I wanted to do. So I researched female architects in Latin America mid-century, like basically who were the first modernists and how were they doing things that were different? How could that possibly inform an architecture that resonated more with my own experience? And I found that it's fascinating, but they were already working in a multidisciplinary form, that they valued craft. You know, in the face of modernity, they were very, very in love and respected craft and learned from the craftspeople, but also that they sang or highlighted the contributions of indigenous peoples to their own work. And so that informed their exhibit design, their furniture design, and so forth. So I have to ask myself, well, was that out of necessity or female empathy? Or were they just like way ahead of their time and not given the credit that they deserve? But so the project is ongoing. I've written articles about it. I eventually want to come up with a book that kind of puts together these essays. But I think that just simply highlighting the contributions of these women, goes a long way. And today, in a more kind of realistic or practical way, I run a build lab at California College of the Arts, where I am, it's a vehicle for students to not only get construction practical experience, but also to do something for social justice, because we typically ally with nonprofits, with organizations such as the Mayor's Office of Housing, or now we're working with San Francisco Planning. So, but I also think that it's especially important for women to get that kind of hands-on experience, precisely because most of us were not invited to the garage to sort of undertake projects during the summers. And I think that that's just to know how to conduct yourself in the wood shop, it's a great gift. And it also gives you respect, I have to say, for the trades. It allows you to understand what the limits and of a material might be, and how you might be interested in pushing that.
Thank you. I think one of the themes that's come up today is when do these behaviors and patterns start? So I thank you both for really thinking about how early can you create an environment and a mindset that's really the right one, not only for the individual, for the culture around them. So what about practice? What have you guys, gals, both seen in practice, and what are you working towards in terms of being a role model for your industries?
I hope this is question 3, because this is the question I'm going to answer right now. And it was, what's at risk if we don't do anything? I think that's sort of kind of the same thing. Kat and I are on the same page here.
Go for it. Where's Saskia? She said if the plan changes, just roll with it. It's cool.
I think that if we don't, as a profession, change and advance diversity, that we're at risk of being not relevant. We should mirror, we've heard it a couple of times today, we should mirror the communities that we serve and we design for, and the demographics are changing. We also heard those stats. So if we don't change, we're going to be left behind. I think, and the clients are expecting it. The emerging professionals expect it. I should say that clients are starting to demand it. We have gotten several requests from clients to describe what we're doing about diversity and inclusion. So it's coming, it's here, and I think I'll tell a little bit about what we've been doing for 3 years and how successful or the progress that we've made. So in 3 years, it's diversity, inclusion, engagement has become a value of the firm. It's not just me, the diversity lady, thank God. We have a measured, both qualitative and quantitative program around all things from recruitment, retention, commitment of the leaders of the office, a whole host of things. So it's been successful in that it's still, we're still on the journey, and it's not a sprint, but we're going to get there, and I encourage everybody to take the risk and Just jump in the water. It's not that bad.
So the tagline for our movement is diversity equals creativity equals profitability. And I think that pretty much sums it up. I remember when I used to research female consumer influence on different segments, because people think women don't buy cars, like the Saab account. But I remember the category where women had the absolute highest influence was construction and home design, your field. I think it was something like 91 or 93% of influence on those decisions is made by women. So I think from a gender perspective, not having a female influence in the designs or even the account management of clients is ridiculous. It's suicide. Why would you omit them? The thing that we've done, we've built a community. We have high awareness. And last year we launched a certification program. So basically, ad agencies, whenever I would meet with them privately or holding companies, they would say, how are we doing? Who's doing better? And there was nobody helping them assess. And so we launched a certification program where we basically took that survey that I told you guys about earlier, the What Women Want survey, where female creatives told us what would make them loyal, and we created an algorithm of the things that if agencies were doing would be key indicators that it was a female-friendly environment. And they can voluntarily allow us to assess them. And what's fascinating is that two types of agencies are coming to us. Those that believe they have bragging rights and want to use this as a recruitment tool and a new business tool, because remember that General Mills and Verizon and HP are now saying, we want to partner with agencies that have, diverse staff. But it's also agencies that knew they were going to fail, because sometimes you're working in an environment where things are broken, and management is clueless or doesn't want to face it. Sometimes having that report card from a third party that you are not up to snuff with the industry is a very powerful motivator to get a chief diversity officer in place or budget to make changes or to change your hiring practices. So that's what we're doing about it.
Thank you. So tragically, the hallmark of a good conversation is that you don't want it to end. So the good thing is that there's a reception and all of these friendly folks are going to be there. So unfortunately, we're not going to have enough time for Q&A, but we invite you all to go to the reception. We do have a few more minutes for some closing comments. So I want to thank the panelists for your inspiring conversation today. We have some closing comments from Russ and Rosa. So if you want to take your seat, that would be great. So I'd like to introduce Russ Davidson. He's a fellow with the AIA, and he's also the AIA National President. Welcome.
It's great to be here, and I always love this time slot in the conference. I'm literally between you and the alcohol, so I will try and keep it brief. I wasn't able to be at this conference the last time you had it because I was filling in for Elizabeth Chu Richter, who was here, and I was up in Portland with Helene. So, I was honored to be the first male AIA president to follow two women. I said in my inaugural comments that, I want to really stand on their shoulders or walk in their shoes. But then I did the visual imagery there, and no. And at the Women's Leadership Summit, which I went to, there was a lot of talk about men advocating for women in the profession, and I committed to being the number one man in the profession to do that. And now I understand there's a word for that, so I'm a man-ambassador, right? And not that this is the only reason to advocate for women, but I grew up with a strong mother, as many of you did, and Kat, I have to tell you, she went to an all-women's college, Mount Holyoke, on a scholarship, and she got a job as a secretary in an ad agency, J. Walter Thompson, and she made her way up to a copywriter. So then I told her, so Mom, you're like Peggy in Mad Men. and she says, I don't know what you mean. So I gave her the whole thing. And she said, I was like Peggy. And I said, but Mom, it's crazy. All this sex, all the drinking, was it really like that? So this is 1955. She says, no, it wasn't that much drinking. So if I have any sense of humor, it comes from her. But I want to really thank you for having me here. It's a very busy job being AIA president, and like Gabrielle, I have to maintain a business, so I have credibility being the AIA president, and it's hard to do both. But thank you, Rosa, and some of my other friends in the audience, like Renee, Emily, Kelly, Julia, and Carol here. I have to say, as AIA president, the most memorable thing to me was to give the gold medal to Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi. And a part of me, because so many people in this room and this sort of whole wave that you guys represent of influence, which is considerable, made that happen. It probably would have been more fitting for a woman to do it, but no, I wanted to do it. She's a wonderful woman, and it was a very touching moment. And you know, she's such a fantastic person. She could have been a little bit bitter about the process, and she just took the total high road. She was so grateful, and just what an extraordinary person. So I wanted to talk just briefly about, you know, equity by design. So what? What's next? Why does this matter? And what can or will the AIA do about it? It's a big organization, and I take this responsibility very seriously. You know, my biggest job is that we have a $68 million annual budget at AIA National, and I'm the chairman of the board, and we have fiscal responsibility. But just before that, I was thankful to be elected, and I do have a firm, and I just want you to let you know that 50% of our recent hires are women. 36% of the architects in our office are women. 44% of the whole staff is women. We have no women principals. We're working on it, but they do have equal or better pay, and that's part of my job. So I value all those things, and I walk that talk. And I don't know if you guys know this either, but the AIA board is the most diverse board ever. The AIA board is 41% women. It's 23% Black and Latino. It's 17% young architects, all of whom are women. And both public directors, who are the appointed positions, are women. So it is, and yes, I could make the appointments of one of the public directors, but it's the membership that elected everybody else. So the AIA membership does value diversity, and they're choosing really a board that's more diverse than the profession itself for the first time to govern it and figure out how to spend that money. So I think we are making some progress there, but we're not at all complacent. You know, we actually just hit last week 89,000 members in the AIA, and that's fantastic. But I would say that means that we need 95,000 tailored programs for our 89. It's a very diverse group of people, and they don't always agree, which you may not believe. And you know, the cynical way would be to say special interest groups. But there's a lot of things going on, and there's just pretty much every aspect of practice, workforce, and creativity. There's something going on, and it's our job to balance all that as the AIA board. So we try and keep a big picture view, and many of the things are sort of across many interests. So I just want to talk a little bit about one that I believe is really important, which is our public awareness program. So increasing the value of what we do and then ultimately getting paid more for it is literally the rising tide that lifts all boats. So we put a lot of money behind our public awareness program. And you'll be pleased to hear we advertise. And one of our account executives is a woman at GSDM in Austin. Roy is the only man we deal with there. And he doesn't really do much. But we advertised this year, and it was a very diverse, it's an interesting ad. It talks about everyday architecture, one of my real fond issues, to try and turn the American public's view of architecture as not just museums and stadiums, but the buildings we walk into every day. It features a diverse group of architects. There is not a single white male architect in our ad, and which is saying something, actually. Our ad agency had this crazy idea to spend a little bit more to advertise on cable news the night the primary results were going to be announced. And we thought we would get 20 million views, but we'd have to pay more for it. And this is before we knew what was going to happen with the primaries. So we got 80 million views for that ad buy, 4 times what was predicted. So, this is not something that is expected to show instant results. But building public awareness is something that over time will build value. And if we build value and there's more money and more appreciation, it helps everything in the AI, including our diversity initiatives. We also do straight up legislative and regulatory advocacy, and we are very concerned about the workforce pipeline. But the why does it matter part, Gabrielle, I think you just said it, it's relevance. One of our big efforts is to demonstrate the relevance of the profession. And we're at a tipping point with relevance. As the world urbanizes more and more, we're more and more needed, yet we're less and less called upon by a percentage of the built environment. So relevance is critical, and diversity is critical to our relevance. And one of the things that, there's a couple of other things going on that I think that we saw in one of the things just recently that it might have been your presentation, Kat, that there's more, people see leaders in the future as having more feminine qualities than masculine qualities. And this is true in our profession, too. There's been this sort of long discussion between architecture, process or product. And we're sort of at a tipping point where it's process, because they expect excellent product from all of us. And so this is getting into the difference between, and I saw it earlier in the profession where design principles are more men than women. I really predict that that's going to reverse in the next several years, because there's a feminine quality that many men have as well, which I would count myself in, which being process-oriented. I love to listen. I love to go to the table and just not have any predispositions. And what comes out is just so cool, because it's better than what anyone could come up on their own. And this quality is often called empathy. And in a world of increasing technology and automation, you can automate almost anything. Google, I'm a little afraid to tell you, is working on automating the entire process of architecture. Just put in a site and parameters, out comes a building. That's kind of frightening. But they can't make that building respond to the desires and emotions of a user group. You cannot outsource empathy. So increasingly, that is going to become one of the few remaining core competencies of the architecture profession. And I really believe women are more suited for empathy than the lone wolf designer who wants to be left alone and create this, the heroic product, this sort of back to the Howard Rourke, my way or the highway design. So I think that as we move more towards a collaborative or a collective wisdom and process-oriented, that's going to become even more relevant. So let me go on to what's next. So we have the Equity in Architecture Commission, led by Emily Grandstaff-Rice, right there. That's going to be concluded, and she's going to make a joint presentation to the council and board in December. That's going to have some concrete recommendations that are going to require funding. And we're going to listen pretty carefully. We're going to do our best to fund it in a sensible way over a period of time, so it's not a one-time thing, but that it's sustainable. And I want to remind you, if you don't know, that the Equity in Architecture Commission, I think Emily put it right, is more like a surge of our diversity efforts. AIA's diversity efforts have been in place for a long time. We have a diversity council, we have a board community committee that deals with diversity and workforce issues, that's funded by Bill Bates, an African-American architect. So we expect the surge of the Equity in Architecture Commission to reintegrate with the work of the Diversity Council and the Community Committee. And we actually have 3 AIA National Board members in the room right now, including our treasurer, who's got all that money in his pocket, Stuart, and Frank and myself. So, you know, you've got 20% of the AI board right here. We can make sure that this gets its share of the funding. There's several other things that are going on that do relate to diversity. One is called the Educational Coordinating Council, which is this joint group between the collateral organizations talking about when is the best time to learn different things. And out of that is coming an understanding that the AIA needs to take a bigger role in helping architects practice. And so we're talking about all sorts of credentialing programs and certificate programs like BIM, project management, mini MBA programs, even what we're calling sort of a re-entry suite of programs offered by the AIA. Because one of the pinch points that was talked about here earlier was how do we get women or men who have left to have families back into the profession. And the AIA should have a package ready for you that says, here's how we can help you learn Revit, we can help you learn project management, we can help you learn how to run your own firm. And so we're working on all that, and those things are under discussion. One of my pet projects is actually a K-12 initiative. So this does speak to diversity, especially African American diversity. And so we've put together a K-12 task force. I actually appointed a school superintendent to be on the AIA National Board. And we're in the strategy and formative periods. Again, this is led by Stuart up there, our treasurer. And we're going to be talking about that at the board meeting in December. And this is an idea of strategy. This is not a career day program. This is about integrating architecture into the curriculum of K-12. It's a much deeper program. AIA used to do this well. We're going to try and get back to it in a serious way. We've already set some money aside for this, so I got a placeholder in the budget in advance for this, so it doesn't come out of the diversity budget, so we can save that for other recommendations. We're going to look, you know, I was reviewing our diversity public policies, and I think that we're going to look at strengthening them a little bit more around pay equity and being a little bit more explicit around pay equity. It is absolutely consistent with our current public policy, but it's important to keep looking at these things and be a little bit more explicit. We have an ongoing discussion about firm culture. You know, when I hear, I go to a lot of conferences like this, and a lot of things that you talk about really cross over to firm culture, which is really not just, frankly, a diversity issue. You know, when you put that slide up of 1 to 3 days for time off, well, the hospital in my community is 500 yards from my office. And I remember my boss was thankful that my wife gave birth in the middle of the night, because I worked those days. And that's the kind of culture that I grew up in. And I don't wish that on anybody. But the other is a bigger issue, which I think you brought up, which is the bigger tent issue. There's been a long discussion in AIA, why is it only licensed architects? Why isn't it everybody who's interested in architecture? Why isn't it everybody who went to architecture school? And I think that equity and diversity has to do with making the AIA a bigger tent and just being more friendly to all those people who are in non-traditional practice. Because yes, Kelly, you're still an architect if you're working for the university, but there's a lot of people in non-traditional practice that actually really belong, and we're making a mistake by pushing them out. So that's some of the stuff that's going on. I'm also, for the first time, doing a retreat with the two people that are following me, Tom Bonnier and Carl Elefante. We're being more purposeful and intentional about continuity, so that what I say here and what I've heard over these last 12 months gets fully passed on to people that follow me, and hopefully that means we get a more effective action on the board. But really, just in the past 2 weeks, I was in Cuba with the Large Firm Roundtable. I think Carol just left, but Carol was right there, and she just got appointed to be head of the Large Firm Roundtable. So that's fantastic, because that's probably the least diverse group in the AIA, CEOs of firms of 150 or larger. And that's a great tribute to Carol and to the Large Firm Roundtable, because they recognize this as a huge problem. And you saw Smith Group up here. That's one of the large firms, HOK. So they're very concerned about equity. Then probably the best stop on that trip was the United Nations Habitat 3 conference in Quito, Ecuador, just last Thursday, where they really talked about an international new urban agenda for sustainable cities that includes making cities safe for women. There was a lot of discussion about gender equity in an international conference about the built environment. So there is progress being made on that. And then the last stop was Portland, Maine. And by the way, you cannot fly from Quito, Ecuador to Portland, Maine in one day. It just didn't work. They slept in an airport. But that's the 5 presidents meeting, and that's ACSA, who's here, NAB, the architecture students, NCARB, and AIA. And, you know, half the discussion was about diversity and gender equity, and what are we all doing together to make it happen. So it's really a top-of-mind issue in the AIA, and I really want to thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to serve as your AIA president.
Okay. Thank you so much, Russ, for coming out of your busy schedule to be with us and for that positive news about what's to come. We're really excited about that. So I'm going to keep this short and sweet because we're already over and we're into happy hour time. I just wanted to remind you again of your commitment cards. Please fill them out. We'll have some Sharpies out there. Interact with the Matrices board. Remember, today is the first day of the rest of your life. And make that commitment in the next 24 hours to do something, anything. Just like Kat said, tweet it out. Be accountable. Have somebody ask you a week from now, how are you making out on that commitment that you promised a week ago, right? Because I'm going to be checking up on each and every one of you. I am. Because we're going to change this profession, and we're going to kick butt doing it. The last thing is I want to extend a warm, warm thank you to all the people that made this event what it was today. Not only the thought leaders, but if you're a volunteer, please stand up so that we can thank you properly. Our unsung heroes, we value everything that you have done today and continue to do for Equity by Design. And also the AIA staff, often unseen, but they're working their butts off as well, trying to make this as enjoyable an event as possible. So if you see them in the hallways today, they're at the front at the registration desk. Please thank them as well. And without further ado, let's go celebrate this amazing day, this amazing year together, and let's keep talking. Thank you.